good at brew, baby? What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back on Hometown Commander. We are back for another episode of Millzy Brews, the show where I normally brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander Return on my quest to outbrew your favorite Magic channel. Today's episode is going to be a teeny bit different. I actually showcased this deck already a week or so back. But I wanted to check back out because I have had the privilege of testing this deck a couple times and kind of fallen in love with it. So I wanted to talk about it, the cards that I found that have done really well, the changes I've made to the deck since probably the last time we viewed it on the channel, and just hope that you guys could see that brewing isn't just about your version 1 deck list, right? Brewing is about playing it, upgrading it over time as you play it, and kind of honing in your deck lists. As usual, the deck list is going to be down in the description. I'm going to leave the original deck list up as well, so if you want to compare them, you absolutely can. This deck, I believe, is 2 cards from the deck that I'm playing currently in real life. The 2 big differences are I do have a copy of Sarah's Sanctum, so that's in the land slots, and then I'm playing a copy of Sylvan Library in the enchantments, but I thought, Sylvan Library is not a cheap card, and I think the deck works plenty fine without it. So, what I want to do is walk through the deck list. This is going to look very similar to the deck again we talked about before, but you may see this video and never have seen the original, and so I still want to talk to you about what the deck is and what it does. Or you may have seen the original and now you're seeing this, and maybe can be the deck that can kind of help you get on the right track as far as making Ellivere your own. Our commander is Ellivere the Wild Chord, 4-mana 4/4 human knight. It says whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, we create a virtuous roll token attached to a target creature we control. If it has another roll, that goes to the graveyard, and that creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. So this is effectively an ethereal armor type ability without first strike. And this is whenever an enchanted creature you control does combat damage to a player, draw a card. When I first built this deck, I knew the virtuous roll token was going to be good. +1/+1 for each enchantment we control, not even just aura that's attached to it, just enchantments in general, is a very good ability. It tends to be what turns Voltron commanders, Enchantress commanders, into a very tough thing to deal with. One of the single best of those auras is Ancestral Mask. Ancestral Mask says that you get +2/+2 for each enchantment on the battlefield, not just that you control. So these kind of 3 or 4 auras are the things that build a good battlefield, and I noticed Ellivere very quickly goes off with this. The only downside is Ellivere cannot attach the virtuous roll tokens to herself, so she's a great target, oh geez, he or she, I honestly don't even know, I'm sorry. We'll go with they, just for the sake of it. They're probably the best target that you could put on something like Ancestral Mask, because you're going to be handing out these mini ethereal armors and all the glitters to your other creatures, whereas Ellivere's not going to get that same privilege. And the second ability is super helpful. In an Enchantress deck where you're relying on other cards that draw you cards whenever you play enchantments, being able to get in and hit someone, as long as they're enchanted, and draw a card, that is not per player, that's per creature. Yes, we're a deck that's going to probably go a little bit taller than wide, but still, if we attack with 3 creatures and we hit with 3 creatures, we're drawing 3 cards, and that's going to help us get into more auras, get into some protection, which is one of the most important things that I built into this deck, and I think that I got to see in the games that I played, and then eventually win the game. I do not expect this deck to win with Ellivere by combat damage, but this deck will threaten to do that if your opponent's not prepared, or you could pick the right opponent. You can knock someone out of Ellivere, and I did knock someone out with commander damage with Ellivere, but it's more or less built to go tall and really hurt your opponents rather than focus on the commander damage side of the game, and mainly just be a 21-22 creature with trample and lifelink, or trample and first strike or whatever, and just be tougher on your opponents to deal with. Mana base, I try to pick my best of a good mix of white-green lands. Holy Healer's Generosity came in the precon. It's a great card for getting the things back. Nykthos is one of my favorite lands, especially with a deck like ours where we're putting a ton of permanents onto the battlefield. Nykthos should tap for a ton of mana. Besagio, of course, could be taken out. I mean, you could probably take these 2 out. throw in 2 basics and you'll be down almost $80 probably there. But I like Nykthos a little more than I like Boseiju, just because I think the getting a ton of mana in one turn is what could lead you to play an enchantment, draw a card, play an enchantment, draw a card, and build your board and go up for that final attack. I tried to put in a couple dual lands I don't normally play, like the Radiant Grove here, but that's just because I'm playing the Nature's Lore. So I wanted to give 2 dual land targets for our, and 3 Canopy Vista, 3 dual land targets for that Nature's Lore, so that we can get a dual land as opposed to just getting a forest off of it. Although we still can. I thought about running the 3 visits as well, but that card of course isn't going down as much, obviously, since Nature's Lore has gotten a more recent reprint. It's sitting a little bit lower now, whereas 3 visits isn't. So I thought I would just play the 1. Rampant Growth is there. We've got plenty of basics for it. Getting into the enchantments, I learned a lot of lessons with this deck. First off, Armadillo Cloak and Unflinching Courage are 2 of my favorite auras in the deck. Obviously, All That Glitters, Ancestral Mask, and Ethereal Armor are our top 3. All That Glitters, +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment you control. Ancestral Mask, +2/+2 for each enchantment on the battlefield. Ethereal Armor, +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, and First Strike. These are the main 3. These are the 3 that are going to take your creatures from normal blocks that your opponent needs to make to danger zone, because they're going to get bigger the more enchantments we put down. But Armadillo Cloak and Unflinching Courage are 2 that I expected to be good, but when you start getting into creatures that are 16, 17s and have trample and lifelink, chump blocking your creature is no longer an option for your opponents, because you're just going to hit for 15 or 16 and still gain the 17, and now you're up in the advantage. So Armadillo Cloak and Unflinching Courage both say the enchanted creature gets +2/+2 trample and lifelink. And those are 2 great abilities to pair together. Trample's the important one, because obviously the bigger we get, the easier it is for our opponent to just toss a creature in front of it and block it, right, to get it out of the way. But even with just lifelink, then it's still beneficial for us to attack. But trample makes it even better. And the one thing that I tried to add was a couple more ways to kind of get trample onto our creatures, so that we can hit once they get big and get really big. The other card that I didn't love on first look, and by that I mean I thought it was a teeny bit expensive, but the first couple times I watched it play out, I loved it, was Pollenbright Wings. This is a 6 mana aura that gives a creature flying. Now we have that ability for 2 mana, so that's not particularly great, but the second ability is where it shines, and that's whenever that enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, you make that many 1/1 green saplings. These are great for blocking. These are great for doing a lot of things with, but I think that can't be not mentioned. I had a creature was about a 20/20, hit an opponent for 16, made 16 saplings, and they were there to just block or threaten to block. And that's something that's important. It's something we need to talk about. A card that performed enormously well, and still one of my favorite Enchantress cards, but that's come out in a while, is Michiko's Reign of Truth. In the first 2 sections of the saga, you give a creature +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment we control. We're actually not playing really many artifacts. The only artifact we're playing is Timber Paladin. But you get the buff that turn, and then it flips over to a 0/0 with a +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment you control. So it basically turns into another copy of something like Eidolon Countless Battles, or basically All That Glitters on a 0/0, where you're just going to have this bigger creature the more of those enchantments you have. And that's important, because our opponent may look at our creatures and go, oh, it's just a 6/6 right now, it's that bad. It's not that bad, but the next turn it could be a 15/15, depending on how many enchantments we play and what situations we put ourselves in. Hollow Haunting did exactly what I expected it to, which is as soon as you get to 7 or more enchantments, all of your creatures have flying and vigilance. You can now attack for free. You're going to deal a ton of damage, and then you can block as well. And I'll tell you, being able to block with something that had lifelink and when that was that big got me out of some sticky situations in combat where an opponent may have just taken me out outright had that creature not have been untapped. But because damage is dealt at the same time and you're going to gain that life back, I ended up coming up ahead of the situation by 10 or 15 life, and that ended up being the difference needed to kind of close out the game and hit for good damage. Blind Obedience and Authority of the Consuls in the same right are cards I have a lot of love for, and the main reason is because we are playing a Gotolf deck, which means that we're not going to go super wide, and that means that we need our creatures to hit through. And if our opponents are always throwing down creatures that can block, well, if we don't have those trample any of those yet, we're not gaining very much. What I like about Blind Obedience is this brings all creatures into their opponent's control and all artifacts. Third of the consoles is just creatures, but it's important because then the chump blockers are going to run out eventually, and we're going to be able to start hitting in for good damage and hopefully end up finishing the game that way. Sphere of Safety I saw do some love. I know a lot of people have some animosity towards Sphere of Safety because it's what people call a more casual card. Maybe it doesn't perform for some people in the metas that they play in, but I love Sphere of Safety. Again, I had situations where it would have cost my opponent 10 or 11 mana to attack me, and that was just not going to be a situation they could find themselves in to pay for. So we'll talk about the rest of the enchantments. We didn't talk about Bear Umbra. Whenever that creature attacks, untap all lands we control, but has +2/+2 and totem armor, so if it would be destroyed, instead remove all damage and destroy this aura. This is great because we can leave the mana up for our protection or for our removal, and then or play more enchantments if we need to. Brave the Sands, give all of our creatures vigilance, and they can block an additional creature. I didn't get to see this in any of my games, but again, vigilance is important. Darksteel Mutation for some removal, making a target creature into an 0/1 insect that is indestructible and loses all their abilities and creature types. So it just basically makes it into a 0/1 little bug. Daybreak Coronet, you can only attach it to a creature that has another aura on it. Ellivere is great for that because she's going to always be spreading around those roll tokens. But it says that creature gets +3/+3 first trait of vigilance and lifelink. Again, great abilities, and it's going to help those creatures that are already pretty big hit hard. Enchantress's Presence, drawing us a card every time we cast an enchantment spell. This is great. We have a couple of creatures that do this when we cast auras, but again, this is how we refill our hand, get more lands down, get more enchantments down, get things going. Fertile Ground, enchant a land. That land taps for an additional 1 mana of any color. Again, most of the time we're either tapping a forest for green-white or tapping a plains for green-white, getting that extra mana or getting double if needed. Again, great. Giant Inheritance wasn't a card I'd seen a ton, but I think it looks great on paper. +5/+5 for 5 mana, and whenever it attacks, create a monster roll attached to one other creature that gives it +1/+1 and trample. What I like about this is you're then handing that trample out to the other creatures you have. The only downside is we can only have one roll on a creature at a time, so if Ellivere is already spreading out her virtuous rolls, then Giant Inheritance isn't going to do us a ton of good there. But what I like about Giant Inheritance is that it can hopefully put that monster roll back onto Ellivere. And it doesn't say up to one other creature, it just says one target attacking creature. So if Ellivere has Giant Inheritance attached to it, it can put that monster roll token on itself, whereas it can only ever put those virtuous roll tokens on others. Now, the one thing I figured out very quickly with Ellivere was that when it ETBs or attacks, it has to put a virtuous token on something, and so that will get you another constellation trigger, meaning whenever an enchantment comes in every turn, because you'll be putting a new enchantment on the battlefield, even if it attaches to a creature that already has a virtuous roll token on it, you're just going to put another one, and that original aura is going to go to the graveyard. But still, you're going to keep it on there and keep the party going. Gift of Immortality, protect that creature. Whenever it dies, it comes back to the battlefield under our control, and then this comes back to attach that creature at the beginning of the next end step. Grasp of Fate for a little bit of removal. Pick for every player. Pick one target on land permanent and exile until this leaves the battlefield. Counters for a little more removal. Whenever it comes in, we draw a card, and that creature becomes a 3/3 elk with no abilities. Rory's Wake to double up on our mana and give a flat +1/+1. This one helped me a ton on turns to try to get 3 or 4 auras down at the same time instead of just getting 1 or 2. Rancor for the trample mainly, and then whenever it's put into the graveyard, we bring it back to our hand. But +2/+0 and trample is all you need. When you have a virtuous roll token on a creature and it's a 11/11, 12/12, 13, just that little bit, and trample is big. Same thing with Rune of Might, giving it trample and +1/+1, and then when it comes in, draws a card. I like the runes for that reason because they draw you a card as soon as they come in. I just didn't think we needed the white rune. I thought we needed more focus on that trample. Sage's Reverie. When it comes in, we draw a card for each aura we control that's attached to a creature. That can be a big, huge draw buff for us. And then enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each aura attached to a creature, not attached to it, to any creature. So this is kind of an extra, +1/+1 for our creatures alongside that virtuous roll token. Season of Growth just got its reprint in Enchanting Tales. whenever a creature comes into our control, we scry one, but it says whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. So anytime we cast an aura from our hand on one of our creatures, we draw a card. Shield of the Oversoul worked pretty darn well. +1/+1 indestructible if it's green, +1/+1 in flying if it's white. It's helpful and it'll help get one of our big creatures into the air. Snake Umbra, another totem armor, just says whenever this creature does damage to an opponent, you can draw a card. Again, another way to draw a card. And totem armor. The totem armor is important. And when we get up to creatures, we'll talk about Umbra Mystic, which gives all of our auras totem armor to protect them from board wipes. Obviously, we can only protect them from destruction board wipes, not exile board wipes or exile effects. But again, we want to protect our creatures as much as possible, considering we're putting so many resources on them. Songbird's Blessing was a fantastic card. There was actually a combat where Songbird's Blessing got me an Ancestral Mask off the top of my deck, and ended up being the reason that I took a player out that turn. It says whenever it attacks you, reveal cards from the top to you, hidden aura. Put it on the battlefield if you don't put it in your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom. So you could put it in your hand if you didn't want to put it down right away. But I got an Ancestral Mask, got it on Ellivere, and I think Ellivere went from like a 15 or 16 to a 32 or 33. I mean, that's the kind of damage difference that is just going to end a game or help end a game. Spirit Mantle. +1/+1 protection from creatures, basically making it unblockable. It's a pretty cool card. Haven't seen it yet in the deck, but again, this is another example of an aura that does what we want it to do. Sterling Grove worked out really well. Helps protect our enchantment creatures from removal. The only downside to Sterling Grove is, of course, if our creatures have Shroud, we can't cast auras from our hand or use Ellivere's ability. But again, for 1 mana, we stack it, go get an enchantment, put it on top, and we can go get what we need and put it on top. Timely Ward, a little bit of protection for any creature. It says if it targets a commander, we can cast it as a head flash and just give something indestructible. And then Wild Growth and Wolfwillow Haven for, again, a little bit more. Each of them allow that enchanted land to tap for an extra green. As far as the spells go, it was a spell like Clever Concealment or Flawless Maneuver or Heroic Intervention that I saw put in a lot of work. Clever Concealment is a spell that I really love. It says any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out, and we can convoke it. There was a scenario, too, where someone played a giant board wipe or a giant mass bounce, and I Clever Concealed by just tapping my creatures that were on tap because they had Vigilance and other things I had. Phase my creature and all my enchantments out, and then there was nothing they could do to my board, and it was just going to come back in on my turn. Flawless Maneuver and Heroic Intervention both give indestructible, but Heroic Intervention does add hexproof to it. The only time hexproof would be even better there would be if your opponent is playing any things that make multiple targets, like an Aether Spout or something like that. You could have Heroic Intervention to stop it that way. Beast Within, Swords of Plowshares for removal. To be honest, built the deck to be a lot more build it up tall and beat down than I did play around with taking out other people's permanents. But if you are playing in a meta that needs more removal, go ahead and put in Path to Exile or Generous Gift or the New Stroke of Midnight. I mean, I think you can do what you want. Royal Treatment worked out, I think, is a card that worked out pretty well. I saw it once, given a creature hexproof and then a royal roll. Not bad again for Ellivere because Ellivere doesn't naturally have that roll token because they're giving it out, so that was pretty good. And then of course E-Tutor, getting any enchantment you want, putting it on top was very helpful. As far as the spells, we talked about the Nature's Lore and the Rampant Growth for just a little bit of RAM. Open the Armory, can go get any aura and put it into our hand. This was really helpful for... I think I used it in the game. I saw it for Armadillo Cloak to get that trample and lifelink, and it ended up working out really well. We're trying out 2 of the Bringing the Auras Back cards. I did draw Retether, but I never ended up playing it. But it says return each aura card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Only creatures can be enchanted this way. And then Unfinished Business, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, then return up to 2 target aura or equipment from your graveyard to attach to that creature. This is a little bit, of course... more restrictive than Retether, but I think it's still important to have more than one. Obviously, you could take Unfinished Business out for something like Brilliant Restoration or Resurgent Belief if you want to just get all of the enchantments out of your graveyard. But again, we're playing mostly auras, so they're important. And then Winds of Wrath to destroy all creatures that aren't enchanted. Again, we're going to have a lot of creatures can be enchanted, especially when Ellivere starts throwing around those Virtuous Roll tokens. So Winds of Wrath should always be a one-sided board wipe. I had considered throwing in something like, I consider doing something like Vanquish the Hordes or Farewell, but I was like, again, we're targeting this to have a little bit more fun, to grow up, swole up, and get in for damage. And again, it was really cool to finally play a green-white enchantments deck that my playgroup didn't absolutely hate. So that was a ton of fun, and I've grown to really love this deck so far. Later this week, we're going to be talking about me taking Ellivere into a couple other color combinations. This week we're going to look at one, and next week we're going to look at one. And those are more thought experiments at the moment, but I'm hoping to try them out eventually, and we'll talk about those when we get there. As far as the creatures go, Archon of Sun's great. Whenever an enchantment comes in, we make a 2/2 Pegasus. This works with Ellivere because if Ellivere puts a Virtuous Roll token on a creature that already has one, we'll still get a Constellation trigger. Or a Gnarlid, +1/+1 for each aura on the battlefield, and it can't be blocked with power less than its power. This is great because it's going to effectively make it unblockable eventually, and we can just put a little trample and, put something like Rancor on it and just get to swinging. Calyx worked so well in the game that I saw him. Whenever another enchantment comes in, we put a +1/+1 counter on something, and then whenever it or an enchanted creature you control deals damage to a player, you can create a token that's a copy of a non-legendary permanent enchantment you control, but we can only do it once per turn. This can copy an aura, it can copy a lot of things, and it just led into fun situations. Most of the time, the game I saw it, I used it to copy an Ancestral Mask, and it just ended up becoming really good. Danitha, Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, and during each of our turns, we can cast an aura from our graveyard, which is great. Helps us bring things back out. Never saw Danitha, but again, that's what she's in the deck for. Get them back out of our graveyard and keep using them. Destiny Spinner. Creatures and enchantment spells can't be countered. And for 4 mana, you can turn a land into an XX, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Again, not bad if you have the extra mana in the later game. Just turn a couple of your lands into big creatures with trample, and then make it even harder on your opponent. Eidolon of Blossoms, whenever it or another enchantment comes in, we draw a card. Great ability. Eidolon of Countless Battles, a card I haven't seen yet, but I'm hoping to soon when I play the deck. It gets +1/+1 for each creature you control and each aura you control. So it's going to get pretty big, and it's an enchantment itself, so again, it counts for all of our cool abilities like the Virtuous Rolls and things like that. I like this card. 3 mana feels right for it, and if we want to, we can bestow it on another creature, but I think most of the time we want it as another body. Did get to see Gilwain. Whenever it or another non-token creature enters the battlefield, we get our choice of a roll to put on it. Again, this is great because then we can put that roll on it and always upgrade it later to the Virtuous Roll that Ellivere gives out. Jukai Naturalist, making all of our enchantments 1 less, but it does naturally have lifelink, so it's not a bad thing to put those auras on, because then we're going to be gaining life. Catilda, another great target for it. She's a star. Star where stars a number of spirits and or enchantments we control. Again, she works really well with Hollowed Haunting, which makes those spirits, but she works pretty well by herself. And then if she goes to the graveyard, we can give a creature flying lifelink and +X/+X, where X is the number of enchantments we control. And again, that lifelink goes a long way. Core Spirit Dancer, +2/+2 for each aura attached to it. And then whenever we cast an aura spell, we draw a card. So it's great on its own, just giving us draw. Lightpaw is a great commander in her own right. I didn't get to see it yet in any of the games. Whenever an aura enters the battlefield under our control, if we cast it, we can search our library for an aura with less mana value and put it on to the battlefield attached to Lightpaws. This is great. If we cast a 3 mana value aura, we can get a 2 or 1 and put it onto Lightpaws. And that's not bad, because Lightpaws could go get that ethereal armor that all that glitters for cheap, get it onto it, and become a threat. Regal Bunnycorn, card I've yet to see, but I know it will do well when I eventually see it in the deck. A star, where star is the number of non-land permanents we control, which is going to be enchantments plus creatures. Or, of course, obviously if an enchantment is a creature as well, it'll only count once, but still. Regal Bunnycorn's going to get pretty big, and it's going to be also a great thing to just put a Rancor on or put one of those Virtuous Roll tokens on. Sanctum Weaver taps for X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments we control. Sanctum Weaver is great. I love this card, and it tapping for mana is so helpful in those early turns. Setessan Champion, whenever another enchantment comes in, we put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. This is great because Setessan gets bigger on its own. It doesn't necessarily need to be enchanted, but then maybe we can enchant it as well and give it trample or get it even better. Siona, Captain of Pyleus, is a great card that was in the precon because it has kind of 2 really good abilities. The first one is when it comes in, we look at the top 7 and get an aura and put it into our hand. And then whenever an aura becomes attached to a creature we control, we make a 1/1 token. So this is great because the more we're enchanting our creatures, the more these human creatures we can have getting ready to block. Sithis, of course, one of the best Selesnya enchantment commanders in her own right, feels great here. Whenever we cast an enchantment, we gain a life and draw a card. Helps us turn through that deck. Timber Paladin, other than Ellivere and probably Songbird's Blessing, this is probably my favorite card from the precon. As long as it's enchanted by one aura, its base power toughness 3/3. As long as it's enchanted by two at least, or two exactly, it's a 5/5 vigilance, and as long as it has three or more, it's a 10/10 vigilance trample. This card is really good, and I like that once you put enough on it, it naturally gains trample. So, get Ellivere's token on it, get one or two other auras, and now you have a 10/10 plus whatever it is, just banging it on your opponents. Umbra Mystic, turning all auras attached to permanents we control into totem armors so that they can be destroyed instead. This is a great ability and will help protect all of our creatures because by a couple turns in, Ellivere is going to have a Virtuous Roll token on all of our important creatures. And then Yenna, I didn't get to see her yet, but I'm very excited to play with this ability. Choose target creature enchantment you control that doesn't have the same name as another permanent you control. Create a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. If it's an aura, we get to untap Yenna and then scry 2. And we can only do it at sorcery speed, but hey, target those more important auras. Armadillo Cloak, Unflinching Courage, All Big Glitters, Ethereal Armor, those really important ones. Make copies of them. We can only make copies of them once, but again, I don't think we mind putting the 2 mana in it to get an Armadillo Cloak or or a Rancor or something like that on another creature to get that trample enabled. But let me know what you think of my updated and tested Ellivere list down in the comments. I really like this deck, and I'm going to definitely pursue playing it more. It was a deck I had a ton of fun with, trying to find the right auras and the right creatures. I don't think that I'm done. I think the creatures may change slightly, the auras may change slightly. Of course, as we get new ones, of course, we can add them in as well. But I really enjoy it. I don't think I added a ton to the deck to make it, monumentally better than it was out of the box. It was just putting some money into the mana base, putting some money into the protection spells, and putting a little bit of money into the creatures just to make the things that we're enchanting better. Other than that, most of this is the same, other than maybe Mirari's Wake and the Michikos. And like I said, my version has that Sylvan Library. Other than that, those are all pretty cheap cards. They either came in the precon or came in more recent sets or are cheap, obviously, besides that Hallowed Haunting. But let me know what you think of the deck down in the comments, and I will catch you guys next time.